All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for How to Petition Anything. My name is Lindsay Vaughn. I'm an academic advisor here at the Division of Continuing Ed at CU Boulder. Today's information session is intended for anyone who wants to learn about the petition process. We're going to review some common petitions and then dig into specific strategies for how to put together a strong petition. Just a brief bit of housekeeping before we jump in. On your Zoom screen, there's a Q&A spot for you to enter questions. We'll address those at the very end, but definitely submit any as they come up throughout the presentation. And we did also want to note that since petitioning often includes some sensitive topics, I want to let you know that any questions that you put into the Q&A box, only the presenters and I will see. And when I ask them at the end, I'll do my best to not reveal any identifying information. And then the other thing is we are going to record today. So we'll be sending out a link afterwards so you can refer back to that or share it out if you need to. And now I'll introduce today's presenters. We have Blazey, Heier, and Graham Douglas. Graham is an academic advisor here at Continuing Ed, and Blazey is our Assistant Director for Academic Advising. We also wanted to say a special thanks to Lisa Cooper. Lisa has been helping support our students in the Resiliency and Reinstatement Program. And we just want to give a special shout out for all her hard work this semester. And now, without any further delay, I'll turn it over to Blazey.
Thanks, Lindsay. All right, as we get started here, I just thought it would be helpful to give you a little bit of framework for what to expect from this presentation. So we'll start by just kind of talking about the nuts and bolts of what a petition even is. We'll look at some common types of petitions and also talk about, how to know if you're actually eligible for a particular type of petition. We'll then kind of move into the meat of the petitions and look at personal statements, like how to organize it, what to include, and what are some other considerations that we should maybe keep in mind here. And then documentation, which is another very, very important part of the petition process. So we'll kind of brainstorm some different types of documentation. And we'll take a little bit of time to look specifically at letters of support, and we'll talk about how to incorporate your documentation instead of just like plunking it all on at the end. After that, we'll dive into resources a little bit and say, like, who is there to assist you along the way and how can you best utilize those resources. Alrighty, so let's go straight into what is a petition. So I know that this webinar is called How to Petition Anything, and that is our goal, is to give you kind of tools and techniques that you can apply to all sorts of different types of petitions. But I also just want to acknowledge that that's an extremely broad topic, anything. And we thought it might be helpful to think about some common petitions on this campus and try to ground some of our examples in those petitions. So I've listed some examples here, and you'll see these examples are kind of split up between like, some academic petitions and some financial petitions. But I also just want to acknowledge that those aren't the only types of petitions. Like maybe you're going to petition to have your conduct record permanently sealed and expunged or whatever, right? So there are lots of petitions, even just on this campus, that we don't have listed here. For the purposes of today's conversation, I really want to focus in on these 4 types as we're giving our examples anyway. So late drop petitions are petitions where, like, let's say, we're going along through the semester and you realize that you need to drop a class for whatever reason, but it's after the deadline to be able to go into Buff Portal and actually drop it. So at that point, you'd have to petition with your college if your college has that as an option. Not all colleges do. A retroactive withdrawal petition is where the semester is over, and maybe it's been over for a while, like maybe this was 2 years ago. And now you are asking to be withdrawn from all of those classes for that semester. So we'll give quite a few examples that kind of touch on the retroactive withdrawal scenarios, because we work with a lot of students who are going through that process. On the financial side, The tuition set that we'll mostly focus on will be SAP appeals. So SAP means that it's through financial aid. So if you aren't meeting the conditions outlined by financial aid, they'll send you a notice and say like, hey, you're on SAP now, your aid has been suspended. And a lot of students see that and they're like, oh, shoot, it's like there goes my aid. And then they just kind of stop. And I think a lot of times people don't realize that that's petitionable. And people petition these successfully all the time. So we work with a lot of students who are going through that process as well. And then tuition disputes. So tuition dispute is with the bursar's office or the continuing ed bursar, depending on whose classes they were. But in order to do a tuition dispute, you have to have already been withdrawn from a class. So either you did it yourself or you did a retro process or something like that. And now you're asking to have, the finances waived for that one, have the tuition waived. So that's what we'll mostly talk about today. But before we get too far into it, we should probably define what a petition even is. I was a philosophy major in college and they were all about define your terms. And it's extremely helpful to define your terms. So I'm going to do that a few times here. So when we talk about a petition, we are talking about a request for an exception from a policy, which seems pretty straightforward, hopefully. But I want to highlight that not all policies are petitionable, meaning that a petition is an avenue for an exception that is built into the policy. It's part of the policy itself to have this like exception option. And you may wonder why we care, like why that's important. The reason it's important is if a policy has this avenue for an exception built into it, it means the committee, like whoever it is that's reviewing your petition, will have some sort of criteria, something specific that they're looking for. And sometimes that's stated. Sometimes it's very clear, like, oh, you have to hit this criteria in order to petition. But a lot of times it's not. And so you'll want to try to think about like, okay, what might they be looking for in these types of cases? And part of that is all about like who's on the committee. And you won't know like individual people on the committee, but if it's a financial petition, it's probably going to have people from the bursar's office, right? If it's an academic petition, it may have people from the dean's office. So you'll just want to kind of keep that in mind as you're thinking about what sorts of things these committees might be looking for. Okay, so eligibility criteria. And I've said this a few times now. So some petitions, either on the petition website or in the paperwork, will explicitly list, like, this is the criteria to be eligible for a petition. Others don't say it so explicitly, but no matter what, whether it's explicit or not, your first step before you pursue a petition is to determine if you meet the eligibility criteria. So I want to give a couple of examples of what I mean by that. So I have here on one side, I've got an academic petition. I've got the retro withdrawal. On the other side, I put the SAP appeal through financial aid. And these are just screenshots directly from their website. So the retro petition, for the eligibility criteria, they say you've got to hit one of these three categories. It's either got to be a serious health concern, a family emergency, or an unexpected financial hardship. And unexpected is key, right? It can't just be like, it turns out college was expensive. It has to be more like, my dad lost his job and then I had to pick up a second job in order to like help keep the family afloat and whatever, right? So unexpected is key there. The SAP appeal, and again, this is the appeal for students who have lost their financial aid. They list four things. So you might be placed on SAP based on your GPA. It could be based on your completion rate. So that means if you have a lot of W's and F's and incompletes compared to the amount of classes you've actually completed with other earned grades, financial aid will say you aren't completing enough of the classes that you are starting out to do. And so we're pausing your aid right now until you can figure out a plan for that. Also, if you've just done lots and lots and lots of credits, federal aid will put the brakes on that a little bit and have you petition in those cases. So again, you have these things that are just very clearly outlined here. The other thing I want to highlight is, so the retro petition says retroactive withdrawal requests are only eligible in cases of unforeseen extenuating circumstances. The SAP appeal says our office will review and consider appeals based on extenuating circumstances. So this phrase is really common on this campus and really on a lot of campuses here in the US. And we'll talk more about it as the presentation goes on. But I wanted to highlight that because it means you can't just appeal financial aid and say like, yeah, my GPA didn't meet the requirement, and so I'm appealing and I didn't go to class, so give me my financial aid back. That can't be a reason for the aid. It has to be extenuating circumstances that cause the GPA to not meet the requirement. And again, we'll go into more details soon. The other thing, so when I took the screenshot, I decided to leave this section in because I thought it was pretty great. The retroactive withdrawal petition also says like, if it's university error or non-attendance, like don't even bring it to us because we don't have the authority to hear that. So not here. And I think that's just such a great example of, you know, not just listing what is eligible, but also thinking about what is ineligible. So I've got some more examples here of what doesn't work for a petition usually. And again, every petition's different. But on the left-hand side, this is some really common language that you'll see on a lot of different petitions here at CU. So it says things like poor performance in a class or GPA protection, like these are not grounds for a petition. I think I've only had one student ever, maybe two, who petitioned to withdraw from courses where they had A's. It's pretty common that if you were doing these types of petitions, you didn't do well in the class. So we'll assume that like, you know, that yes, the GPA is not where you expected it to be, but you're not trying to protect your GPA. That's not your reason for doing the petition. Your reason is that you had these external extenuating circumstances that impacted your GPA, right? So it's like, it's more of a symptom than a reason, if that makes sense. The other thing that I have kind of on the left side of, or sorry, the right side of the screen is, this is a little different and confusing sometimes, but there are other things that could be eligible, but not in and of themselves, right? And so this top one here, having a disability, having a disability in and of itself is not grounds for a petition because that's why we have accommodations through disability services. But there could be reasons why having a disability is involved in your petition, right? So if you were diagnosed midway through the semester, that's different. You wouldn't have had accommodations. You wouldn't have had the appropriate resources and treatment in place to be able to be successful. So that's different. It's not just that you have a disability, it's that you didn't have the information to be able to access the resources you need. Also, sometimes circumstances will come up and exacerbate a disability, right? And so then it's not like the disability in and of itself is the grounds for a petition. No, it's about all these other things that kind of snowballed for you. Same thing with COVID. COVID in and of itself is not grounds for a petition because everybody was impacted somehow by COVID. And so the university, you know, like did all sorts of things, like said, oh, spring 2020, everyone got to take those classes pass fail if they wanted to and stuff like that, right? So if you're petitioning based on COVID, what you need to be able to do is demonstrate how you were uniquely impacted by COVID. You would want to say like how COVID impacted your coursework, not just like COVID happened and it was really hard, because everybody could say that. You want to really make it specific to you and your situation. Same thing with like hard classes, or like, you know, if you are doing a petition, ask for your money back, and you're like, it was just too expensive, like that can't be your reason, right? It might be your motivation, it might be involved somehow, but it can't be a standalone reason. I hope that makes sense, but if folks have questions, Lindsay, I know you're moderating, so you're welcome to interrupt me at any point. All right. So what happens if the eligibility criteria isn't stated? How do you figure out what it is that the committee is looking for? The first thing you could do is just ask And I know that sounds simple, but that's because it is simple. But I think a lot of people don't realize that that's actually a really appropriate thing to do. So for instance, if you're petitioning for SAP with financial aid and you're like, well, I know it's about my GPA, but is it also about completion rates? I'm not sure. Just ask financial aid and they can talk to you about it. If you're petitioning for a late drop and you're not really sure if your circumstances quite fit what it is the college would be looking for, just reach out to your academic advisor or your dean's office and just ask them about it. And you can say like, well, here's my situation and see what they say. And then you can ask other questions too, like, well, what sorts of cases have you seen in the past that have been successful? Like, what sorts of things are they looking for? Because there may be more to your situation that you just haven't thought about. Oh yeah, that other thing impacted me too. And like as you're having these conversations with your advisor or dean's office, it could trigger some other ideas for you. The other thing that's helpful is to try to put yourself in the committee's shoes. So the petitions committee is beholden to somebody. That's kind of a weird way of saying it, but committees are beholden to the student body and the dean's office and the registrar and the accrediting body of the university. Or like if you're petitioning with financial aid, that's federal aid that we're talking about here. Financial aid only has so much flexibility within that. They're reviewing your petition on behalf of the Department of Education. So if you're trying to think like, what's the criteria, you want to think about like, what are the parameters and other expectations that this committee might be subject to, and just kind of see, as you work through that in your head a little bit, you can start to figure out like, yeah, I think my situation could meet the eligibility criteria, even though it's not explicitly stated what this criteria is. I kind of get what it is they'd probably be looking for there. Okay, so now it's time to get writing. Once you've identified what the eligibility criteria is and what your extenuating circumstances are, then you can go ahead and start writing your personal statement. And as we get into this part, we'll take a little bit of time to talk about just how you might organize your personal statement. But then I have a couple other things that I want to think about in terms of, just what you should and shouldn't include in a personal statement. So the first thing, like I said, when you're ready to write, you should be at a point where you can ask yourself and answer, what are my extenuating circumstances? And how do those extenuating circumstances fit into the eligibility criteria? So extenuating circumstances are the outside factors that impacted you and your ability to be academically successful. So for example, if you're petitioning for a retroactive withdrawal, what you're saying there is that semester isn't a reflection of who I am as a student. It's a reflection of all this other stuff I had going on that prevented me from being able to be successful as a student. So you're not asking them to clean up your transcript. What you're asking is to have an opportunity for your transcript to reflect you and who you are as a student, rather than reflecting all this outside stuff, right? So that's how you would think about your extenuating circumstances. The other piece that I really wanted to drive home is how those fit into the eligibility criteria. So if you remember when we were talking about retros before, there are 3 categories for retros. A serious medical situation, unexpected financial hardship, and a family emergency. So if you're thinking like, okay, this is my situation, these are my circumstances, and they're definitely medical. They fit into the medical category, right? So once you've done that, you can now kind of use that as essentially the starting point for your thesis statement, right? Like this is the basis of your whole argument. Once you have that like thesis sort of thing set up, I always think it's helpful to write a timeline. Maybe not always. There are some petitions where it's like, that it really doesn't apply. But in most cases, it's helpful to just like write up a timeline. And usually you're not giving the timeline to the committee, but it helps you just stay organized and make sure that you remember the dates and the order of things. And then also if you've looked at the dates when you write your timeline, when you start writing the actual personal statement, you can go in and sprinkle in those dates as you go. And it can be really helpful to write your statement sequentially. I've seen statements where I'm like, you're kind of jumping around a lot and it's hard to keep track of where you're going with your petition. So try to be just clear and sequential whenever possible. There are some times though where it is really helpful to just include the timeline in your personal statement. I had a student one time who had just a really, really complicated situation, and there were lots of different things happening all at once, and it was all related to this family emergency situation, but it was hard to kind of track all the pieces. So he ended up just keeping the whole timeline in his personal statement, and that helped a ton. So I think that's always a good starting activity. And then it's up to you to kind of decide if it makes sense to include the timeline in your statement or just have it for your reference. So then as you're writing your statement, you can think about it as like, the biggest focus should be about the semester in question. So if you're petitioning for a late drop from a class this semester, you really need the bulk of your statement to talk about right now. But it's possible that you need to include some background information. Like maybe whatever's going on for you right now this semester actually started last spring and it's just been building up and building up. And so you want to kind of lay the foundation and provide that background information. But if you spend too much time on the background information, then your point about the fall could be completely lost. So just make sure that the bulk of it is about the semester in question, even if there is some background information. Like some background's helpful, but don't overdo it. Also, it's actually pretty common for students to be in that kind of situation where what's happening right now isn't just like boom, some event. It's the culmination of something that's been happening over time. And so when you provide that background, it can also be helpful as a way of explaining to the committee that, yes, I was impacted throughout multiple semesters, but it's really just this fall 21 semester where it all came to a head. And so as you're explaining that, you need to think about like, what was it about the fall semester that was uniquely impacted by this situation compared to the summer classes I took and the spring classes I took when all this stuff was still going on. Also, when you think about unique impact, this is always helpful with a late drop. Let's say you're in 4 classes and you're petitioning to late drop one of those classes based on extenuating circumstances. You'll want to think about like how to explain how those circumstances really just meant that you have to drop one of these, right? Because what you don't want to have happen is you don't want the committee to read this and think like, is that class just hard? Is that why you want to drop it? Because we're not going to drop it if it's just hard. So you want to explain why that class was uniquely impacted. And it could be that all classes were impacted, but this professor is giving you an incomplete, and this professor said that they would waive the second exam, like whatever, right? You want to make sure that you provide that context and then say, but this last class, like I can't get an incomplete because the professors are retiring and he couldn't waive anything, blah, 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 whatever, right? You want to explain how your circumstances really just fit the one class. Okay, and then the final piece in how we organize the petition is to end on a positive note. And this is really important because, as you're writing these petitions, you're explaining a lot of really hard stuff and just, not fun stuff and stuff that can be a little overwhelming. And you don't want the committee to walk away from that feeling like, ugh, I don't know how this student's going to be able to do it moving forward, right? You want the committee to walk away from your petition feeling like you are well positioned to be successful in future. And there are lots of ways you can show that. So one thing I have is, did you take time off from school? And if you did, what did you do with that time? Like if you're saying that you had to petition because like you had a financial emergency and you've been trying to figure out your financial situation, then explain, and I took time off so I could save some money up so that when I return to classes in the spring, I won't be in this situation again, right? So you want to be really strategic about how you explain where you are now and what your plan is for moving forward. Also, if you connected with resources during that time away, that's helpful, even if it wasn't time away. Like if you just have started engaging in resources or getting new treatment, or, just like finding tools to help you be academically successful. And then if your transcript shows like, yeah, like I've got all A's and B's this semester, all of that helps the committee feel just more positive about where you are and what your ability to be successful is looking like moving forward. So it's really, really important to try to end on that note. Okay, so then as far as how much you should or shouldn't include in your petition, I always tell students that it's really important to try to be as open and honest as you are comfortable being. And there are lots of reasons why you may not be super comfortable being, extremely open and honest, and that's fine. But if the committee really understands what's happening and what was impacting you, they're going to be better able to make a decision about your situation, right? If they don't fully understand it, they're going to be filling in the gaps a little bit on their own. And we don't know how they'll fill in those gaps, right? And they may walk away from your petition with questions and say, I don't know, like I don't fully understand what could be happening here. I don't feel like I have enough to approve it. So the more open and honest you can be, the better. But you can still do it in ways that protects your privacy. Like let's say you got a new diagnosis, but you're not comfortable saying what that diagnosis is. That's fine. You can say, I got a new diagnosis. I'm really not comfortable going into the details of it. But then if you have a doctor's note that says like, and so-and-so got a new diagnosis, and also doesn't say what it is, that's fine. They don't need to know what it is, just as long as they know that it happened. The other reason why students often don't share a lot of details is like we talk to a lot of students who are struggling with things like substance use and abuse and addiction issues and things like that. And I've talked to a lot of students who are worried that the committee will see that and say, no, sorry, like that's not grounds for a petition, but it absolutely is. So if that's something that you've been struggling with or working through, I would definitely encourage you to be open about that, because it's always helpful for the committee to know what is truly going on. The committee isn't here to judge you. That's not their job. And they're not going to like send this to the cops or, like the committee is just here to see like what impacted you and does it make sense for this to be an exception for you. All right. So the other thing I would just want to say is make sure you know your audience. And I know I said earlier, like you probably don't know exactly who's on the committee, and that's by design. Usually these committees are kind of a secret committee. That way there's no risk that someone will bribe the committee members or whatever, right? But you can kind of guess who's going to be on them. Because like I said, if it's a petition with the bursar's office, there will probably be some or all of the people on the committee who are bursar's office representatives, right? So try to think about who is on the committee and what information they might have, and what questions they might have too, right? Because like I was saying a moment ago, if the committee members walk away from your petition and they feel like they don't quite have enough information or something is unclear, then they might be filling in the gaps on their own. And you're not going to be there to answer their questions. And you won't get an opportunity to answer it. Like they're not going to come back to you and say, hey, can you answer X, Y, and Z? Like, no, they just have to make a decision. So try to be as clear up front as possible. Also, when you think about like how much information you include, you should think about it in a couple of ways. So whatever you put together as your petition package, so your statement and also your documentation, it should include everything that you want the committee to see so that they can make an informed decision about it. Don't leave anything out. Don't assume that the committee is going to run your transcript and see this. If you think that there's something important on your transcript that they need to see, you attach your transcript. Some committees are made up of people who have different levels of access to the student system, and some people on the committee might not have access to your transcript, right? So whatever you want them to see, don't assume that they'll have it. They're not going to have your Wardenberg records or anything like that. If you need that included, you include it. On the flip side, though, the committee members may see things that you don't have access to or that you just didn't think about. And I listed some examples down here. So contact logs, advisors, financial aid, the bursar's office create contact logs every time they work with a student. So if you're petitioning and you're saying, I didn't even know that withdrawing was an option, the committee might look and say, well, here's an email exchange from October where you and your advisor are talking about withdrawing, right? So like, you just want to be mindful of what information might already be out there. Responsible honor code findings, that doesn't mean it's a no-go. I've seen people who have still been able to petition for things even with an honor code finding, but it might mean that you need to explain it a little bit in your petition, and just say like, I just want to acknowledge that I do have this honor code finding that said I was responsible, and I just want to explain that a little bit. And that's fine, just explain it. Last date of attendance, whenever instructors post a grade as an F, they have to say what your last date of attendance was. So if you're writing a petition and you say, like everything was going great until April when I was in this car accident, and then I couldn't do the finals and whatever, and you may have documentation about the car accident and whatever else. But if the committee then looks at your last date of attendance and they see that you stopped going to all of your classes in February, that petition is denied. So just make sure that you are aware that there's information in the system out there that the committee may or may not have access to. And if it's something that you think you should probably acknowledge proactively, do it. If you're ever not sure if you need to be proactive, just err on the side of acknowledging it proactively. Alrighty. So now we're going to shift a little bit to talk about documentation, because this is a really important part of putting together your petition. So when we were talking about the personal statement, the first thing I said is ask yourself, what are your extenuating circumstances and how do they fit the eligibility criteria? When you start getting your documentation together, you're going to ask the same question, but we're going to apply it a little bit differently. So your documentation is basically just there to verify whatever you say, right? So if you're saying like, I was in a car accident in April, then you go find documentation showing that you were in a car accident and that it was in April. But you also want to think about what category, like what eligibility criteria are you saying your petition fits? If you're saying this is a medical thing, then you need medical documentation too. It's pretty much impossible to have a petition approved based on medical situation if you include zero medical documentation. You may have a letter of support from your advisor. You may have, something showing, I don't know, like financial hardship or interruption with your classes or whatever. But if you're saying it's a medical situation, you've got to have something from a medical provider. Okay, so what types of documentation should you use? It kind of depends on what you're doing. I mean, it's going to be unique for you. It's going to be unique for the type of petition you're doing. But if you're setting up your petition where you have some background information and then you talk about the semester in question, and then you have some follow-up information about here's where I am now, here's my positive note, you should really think about having documentation for each of those stages. So if you're saying, well, my background information is whatever, then you have something to document that. Most of your documentation should be about the semester in question and should ideally be dated sometime during the semester in question. Because if it's not dated from that time, like if you're saying, well, and then I got diagnosed with whatever, but that diagnosis was, a couple months after the semester ended, that's going to be really hard to say how it impacted, fall 21 if you didn't actually then go seek help until the spring, if that makes sense. So think about having documentation for each of these stages, but no matter what, you want to make sure that you have lots of documentation that's specific for the semester in question. Some of the best types of documentation are letters from providers, advisors, faculty, attorneys, whatever. Letters are nice because we do see a lot of students who will say like, okay, so I've got medical documentation, but the medical documentation is oftentimes written, by an MD who's speaking like doctor speak, and the people on the committee may have no idea what that means. Or even just like having a diagnosis, that doesn't mean the people on the committee understand how that diagnosis actually plays out and impacts you. So it's fine to include medical records. And sometimes that's helpful because it can show like, yeah, I met with providers on these dates or whatever. And it can attach it to the semester like through those dates. But if you have a letter from the provider that explains it, that's so helpful. So that's the most important type of documentation you can include for most types of petitions. If you're petitioning based on financial situation, it just depends on your situation, but you may be able to get some pay stubs, or if you suddenly had to pick up lots of extra hours because to accommodate whatever financial situation your family's in, you could ask your employer to write a letter about that even, and just say, yeah, on such and such date, this person started working twice as many hours as they had been, or whatever. I also have some other kind of creative brainstormy types of documentation, because sometimes it just is hard to find documentation. Obituaries can be helpful, but it's especially helpful if it has your name. If it doesn't have your name on it, then you need to find some other way. Like you can include the obituary, but see if you can find some other way to connect you to that person. Flight records, like if you had to leave for a family emergency, flight records can help confirm that. Email exchanges with faculty, like if you were emailing your faculty and saying like, hey, I had this emergency in the family, so I'm not going to be in class this week. I don't know when I'll be back. That's helpful because it shows that you were talking to your professors, and it lists the date on there too. So it ties it to the semester in question. Okay, and then how to actually use documentation. So a lot of times students will just have all this documentation and they just attach it to the petition and call it a day. It's really important that you reference the documentation throughout. Otherwise, your committee might look at it and say, okay, what am I supposed to get from this? Especially if it's like medical records or something. So as you're writing your petition, you'll just want to think about like, adding a line saying, such and such thing happened. As you can see in the police report on page 4 or whatever, or Dr. So-and-so said in his letter, he verifies that I have whatever diagnosis. So just find a way to reference those documents so that it's clear to the committee, so that again, we can avoid having them do a bunch of guesswork on things. And then letters of support. So not all letters of support are great, like they're not all equal. So when you ask someone for a letter of support, it's actually really helpful if you can say, and can you speak to X, Y, and Z, right? Because like they don't know what's going on. And sometimes people are like, well, I don't know that I can say I support your withdrawal. And you say, yeah, nobody cares if you support it. Like we just need you to verify that this thing happened. So when you think about a letter of support, you want to think about what you're hoping it will do. And I gave a few examples here, but if you're not sure about like your specific situation, we can always talk through those. So if you're trying to get a letter of support that is showing some sort of change, right? It could be that, you started a new treatment program. Then you would get a letter of support that says, can you list the date that I started this treatment program? Right? Because then we're able to identify, boom, here's when the change happened. Or this is the day that I got this new diagnosis and it was midway through the semester, whatever. If you're trying to show impact, so like I said, if you just submit like medical records, the petitions committee may have no idea how to read it. So then it's helpful to have a doctor's note saying like, this is how it impacts the student. They have difficulty focusing and, can't look at a screen too long because of their concussion or whatever it is, right? Like if they can talk about how your medical situation would have impacted you, then that's super helpful. And then this last one is especially helpful for the part where you're, trying to talk about like ending on a positive note. If you are trying to show the committee that you are in a space to move forward successfully, then you say, I have started engaging with academic coaching and I've got this letter from my academic coach. And then you would ask your coach to say like, this is when we started working together. This is how often we meet. And yeah, the student is super engaged and, really following through on everything that I asked him to do. And like I said, the documentation that you use for your situation is going to be unique to you. And if you're looking at this and you're like, I don't know what I should do still for documentation, then talk to one of us and we're happy to kind of brainstorm with you a little bit. Graham and I were talking earlier about how sometimes it seems like there are some documents that you just can't use, like letters from parents. But that's not always true, right? Like every situation is different. So I had a student a few years ago who was petitioning for something based on like financial hardship, but the financial hardship was specifically related to his parents' business that they owned. They owned a restaurant, and the student had to fly back home, help them with the restaurant. So they weren't just parents in that case, they're also his employers. So that had to be his documentation. And he was working without pay, so he didn't have pay stubs for it. So like his parents wrote a letter and they actually got it notarized to formalize it and everything. So there's always nuance, and your situation may look totally different from somebody else's, but we're definitely happy to help you brainstorm ideas around it. Okay, so if folks have questions, let us know, but I'm gonna pass it over to Graham now.
Okay, thank you so much, Blazey. So the next part that I want to talk about will be resources and support. And what I want you to remember from this part is that you're not alone in this. Sometimes it can feel like that, but you're not alone at all. There's a lot of people on campus and a lot of people outside of the institution that can help you as well. So as you're going through any kind of petition process, seek out that support if you feel comfortable doing so. I've got actually, if we could go back to there we go. So the first I have there, the first, group of people to talk to would be your academic advisors. Now obviously I am an academic advisor, so maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I think we're a great place to start in terms of resources and support. So if you feel comfortable working with an advisor, please reach out, because we're all here to help. That's our primary goal. And so if you have an advisor that you feel really comfortable with and that you've worked with before, reach out to them. If you don't, start with us in continuing ed and see what we can do for you. So definitely reach out to your advisors, because we're, I think, a really good place of support. Faculty and instructors as well. So if if you've got a professor or faculty member or instructor that you've worked with in the past, maybe you took a class with them and you enjoyed it, whether it's a class you're, in your semester that you're petitioning for or not, feel free to reach out to them as well. And I think they'll be a great resource for you. Outside of the institution, think about those you trust and those who support you. These could be family members, friends, people, mentors, a boss, a supervisor, a coworker, somebody that has your back, and they can be really helpful in terms of this process. The CAPS Center here on campus is fantastic for helping you kind of navigate a lot of these situations and maybe the feelings that it could bring up as you're navigating any kind of petition process where you have to kind of think about or address some hard times. And then the writing center as well. I mean, you're writing a petition and they can help you kind of craft a statement that could be really beneficial to your process. And when I say seek out support, I mean in whatever way you need it. But I think that maybe more specifically, that could also look like a second set of eyes on your personal statement. I know that when I sit down to write something, I think it is amazing and a work of genius. And then if I have somebody else look at it, they can always find something that I can improve on. Or even just going back and looking at it later is always helpful. Writing is definitely a process. So don't let this be a situation where the first draft is the draft that you submit. You can always improve your personal statement, and there's a ton of support out there and resources for that. Okay, so we'll want to just wrap up with kind of this last section. So basically, you've submitted your petition and you've received your decision. So what happens next? A couple of different, possibilities here. It certainly just doesn't cover the gamut, but hopefully your petition is approved. If you've put together the strongest petition that you can. You've got all the supporting documentation and evidence, and it fits the eligibility criteria. Hopefully it'll be approved. And if so, that's fantastic. But you're not done because you still have more courses to take. And what I want you to do from this experience is really just learn from that experience and keep moving forward. Think about the challenges that you've had in the past. Be proud of yourself for overcoming those, and then keep moving forward in your process for completing your bachelor's degree. Now, it could go a different direction. Your petition could be denied. And you could have put together the strongest petition possible, and there could be a situation where it's just denied. And in those situations, don't panic. It is not the end of the world. You can still move forward. There's often still options. Take a moment, take some time to kind of reflect on the experience. And then when you're ready, come talk to your advisor, and we can figure out, how to move forward in a successful and positive manner. And just like, as if your petition was approved, this is a learning experience, and you can keep moving forward from that. So that kind of wraps it up for us. And now we'd like to open it up for some questions.
All right. Thank you, Graham and Blazey. We do have some questions. So let's start here. Can you do a retroactive withdrawal from certain classes and not a whole semester?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
So that used to be possible. And then about, I want to say maybe 2 years ago, the university told the retro committee that moving forward, it'd have to be an all or nothing sort of thing. But there is some nuance to that. So like in the summer, for example, you might have a class that's A session where it's like just June, and a class that's B session where it's just July. And maybe A session was totally great. You finished the class, and then right after B session started, something happened, and just that session was impacted. In those cases, the university views it as a separate semester, even though it shows up as the same thing on the transcript. So if your situation kind of falls into that, it may be possible, but in most cases anymore, it's got to be that all or nothing full semester thing. I personally am hoping that the university will go back to the way it used to be, but I don't know that that'll actually happen. But for now, it is an all or nothing full semester.
Thanks. Okay, another retro question. If someone is planning to submit their retro petition this week, hypothetically speaking, if the petition gets approved, would it be too late for spring classes? I assume the retro would put them back into good academic standing if it were to be approved. What's the timing look like?
That's a really good question. I would say, first of all, email the retroactive withdrawal coordinator. Her name's Laura, and her email is just retrow@colorado.edu. And you may just want to run it by her, because if you submit it this week, it may not get before like the next committee hearing, right? Maybe that docket's already full, right? So you want to start with the retro coordinator and just see if she has a sense of how soon it would be heard. But the other thing I would say is the retro coordinator makes like a huge effort to get as many retro committee hearings in right after fall grades post as humanly possible, because she knows that students need retros in order to graduate or in order to enroll for spring classes. And she does try to prioritize those students where that timing is super crucial. So email her to be sure, but I think if you're submitting it this week, you will probably know in time for spring enrollment.
Okay. This question came in during the time when you were talking about kind of eligibility, and they're asking about what about not being able to afford the resources needed to treat the disability, which I assume kind of we talked about, having a diagnosis isn't enough. You'd have to like have a new diagnosis or something like that.
Yeah.
But can you talk a little bit about if
with a
diagnosis, what
That's
about
great.
resources?
Yeah. So that would be something where it's not just having the disability, it's about having this other thing, right? And I think that a committee would hear that like a, unexpected financial hardship sort of thing, right? Where it's like if you were in a different situation, you may be able to treat it and then be successful. So yeah, I think that would be one that would be eligible.
Okay, that's helpful. One person asked about a recording, and we will definitely send out a link to the recording, which is helpful for this of all. There's so much good info you'll want to refer back to. Okay. Is there, which Graham kind of spoke to as far as resources, someone that they can send their petition to for feedback before officially submitting it? An academic advisor has already read it, but obviously wanting a little bit more peace of mind. Any thoughts or suggestions on that?
Yeah, so if an academic advisor has already read it, that's fantastic. If there's somebody else you're working with that you trust and would like to get a second or third set of eyes on it, I think that would be great. We're always willing to and welcome those opportunities to help students. So if you feel comfortable sending it to us, we'd absolutely be happy to look at that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, people you work with that you trust, your support structure. So think about your family and friends. And it's not always necessarily, somebody you'd want to work with in terms of these kinds of situations. But if there is somebody there that you trust and would be, you think you would provide some good feedback, then yeah, absolutely get a third set of eyes on that or more. Blazey, do you have any other additional recommendations for others?
Yeah, I was going to echo some of the stuff that you listed earlier too about the Writing Center on campus. And also we have an online version of the Writing Center called the Composition Hub. Both of those are great resources. They're free. And it would be nice too, because they don't know you. So like your advisor may already know your situation and maybe like just knows your situation well enough to feel like, oh yeah, this totally makes sense. But if someone who's never encountered you before is reading it, they might be like, I'm a little confused. Can you explain this to me? So sometimes it's helpful to have someone that you don't even know take a look at it, and they're really great resources for that.
Absolutely, that's such a good idea. I'm glad you mentioned the online composition hub. I just put the chat or the link to that in the chat.
Nice. Okay, so this is kind of a scenario question, and this might be one of those where the student, we would suggest just meeting with one of us, but I'm going to throw it out there because it might help other people, especially with late drops. So this is a student who's struggling with some mental health issues and is thinking about petitioning for a late drop for just one class. They're seeing a licensed therapist, but aren't sure that person is going to be able to give that documentation that's needed. What would we suggest? Is there, I guess they've been told by an advisor that it might not be approved as a late drop for just one class. Do you have any insight on late drops in general, although that's pretty college specific? And then with it, thinking about would an incomplete be a better option instead of doing a late drop? There's a lot there, but.
Yeah, well, and that might be a good one for us to, you can meet with one of us one-on-one, but incomplete is a really great backup plan that you can start with. I know it's weird to start with the backup plan, but that's what I would recommend. And the reason why I'd recommend that is when you submit the late drop, like the deadline to submit is the last day of classes, but by the time the committee reviews it, grades might be posted. So if you didn't do your final then, because you were hoping that it'd be a late drop, like then you might be in trouble. So if you've made arrangements with your professor to get an incomplete, then what would happen is it posted as an I and you're waiting for the late drop process to go through still, right? So have that kind of safety net in place by working with your professor to see if you can get an incomplete set up. And
can I jump in with an incomplete question?
Yeah.
If you are feeling a little bit nervous about talking to your instructor about what's happening, do you have any suggestions on kind of broaching an incomplete with that privacy in mind?
Mm-hmm. I would say reach out to student support and case management. They're an office on campus that can help students with just lots of different things. But mostly when students are encountering like health concerns and stuff like that, and helping students communicate with faculty. And they're housed within the Dean of Students office. So they might be able to reach out to your faculty member, protect your privacy, and say like, hey, I want you to know I'm working with this student. And I can attest to the fact that they do have a legitimate situation, and they don't have to say what the situation is. And then they're saying, you know, I'm asking on behalf of the dean's office or whatever, you know, like, so I would say reach out to student support and case management. They probably won't be able to, you know, send a letter like that until they've talked to you. So you can't just email them and say, hey, can you reach out to my faculty? But I would absolutely encourage you to meet with them, and they're all super nice and great. So that would be my number one thought there. The other thing is, if you do try to just broach the conversation with the faculty on your own instead of having SSCM reach out on your behalf, you don't have to share any more than you're comfortable sharing. And it's fine to say, I have some serious health stuff going on. I'm not really comfortable going into the details, but I was wondering if I could have an incomplete. What a lot of students and faculty don't realize is there are two different types of incompletes. So usually the type of incomplete that we think about is the type where, you know, you've been doing pretty well, everything's going fine, and then like something happens at the end of the semester and you can't do the final or whatever. And then you and your faculty member work out a time later where you finish the final. But the other type of incomplete is where the faculty member gives you an I, and then you just re-enroll in the class at some point within the next year. And when you do that, the I will just stay locked in place on your record forever, and it doesn't impact your GPA at all. You don't even have to enroll with the same faculty member. And that's a nice option if there's something that's maybe been impacting you kind of throughout the semester. And if the faculty member doesn't think that you're a good candidate for the type of incomplete that we usually think of, where you just wrap up that last little bit, doing the second type where you just re-enroll is a good option. So if you try to broach the conversation with your professor on your own, you could say, can I have the type of incomplete where I just get an I now and then start from scratch in future, like re-enroll within the next year.
And then with that, just someone else asked the process for an incomplete, and it does start with that faculty member of that course. So that's who the first person you chat with about. Okay. We have, this is a great question. Would you recommend including programs like resiliency and reinstatement in a petition to show that you are as improvement and engagement in academics? Lots of head nods, I would agree. It's a great one to include. And this person has had experience with the SAP appeal and it getting approved, but thinking about R&R for maybe a different type of petition and it being helpful. Yes.
Yeah, definitely include it. And I'm sure Graham and or Lisa would be able to like write a letter of support confirming that you did it and talking about how engaged you were. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, if you're participating in the program, let me know. I'm absolutely happy to write a letter of support.
Awesome. Okay. And then our last question, unless any more come in, what percentage of petitions submitted are approved? Do committees across campus ever share those numbers? That second question is key.
I have no idea. I mean, I don't know. Like, I think committees must keep, I don't know if they all keep data on it, but I think the retro committee probably keeps data, and maybe financial aid keeps data. But there are a lot of like extra factors, right? Like if you submit a retroactive withdrawal petition and it doesn't meet the criteria, it doesn't even count towards your numbers at all. They just don't even hear it, right? And with financial aid, if you're submitting a SAP appeal, it's a lot more likely to be approved the first time you do a SAP appeal. But the second time that you have to do, it's going to be harder. And the third time, it's going to be really, really hard. So part of it also depends on like where you are in that. But I would say, yeah, if you have, you know, a strong case and you put together your petition pretty well, like the committees on this campus, they aren't reading petitions with the mindset of like, what do I need to do to justify a denial? They also aren't reading it in terms of like, what do I need to do to justify approving it? They're just reading it and looking for the facts. So if you can present everything clearly and support it with documentation throughout, like that's going to help your chances a ton. I know that's not a very concrete answer, but it's the best I have.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, that's it, everyone. That's all the questions. Thank you again to Blazey and to Graham. Thank you all for joining us. If you do have any additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out to CE Advise or in Buff Portal Advising, schedule an appointment with one of us. We're happy to talk about anything specific in more detail with you. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.